Welcome to Hashtag History, episode 90. I'm Leah, and if you haven't already noticed by that intro, this week's episode is a little different. As many of you know, for the season finale episodes, we like to interview a guest, and this season is no different in that regard. But what is different is that due to scheduling conflicts, I was unfortunately unable to be there when Rachel interviewed our guest. So instead, I get the honor of welcoming you to the episode and wishing you happy listening as Rachel interviews our incredibly special guest, Amber, on the Osage Nation Murders. Enjoy.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Leah.
And this is Hashtag History,
the podcast for both history nerds and history haters alike,
where we dive into history's greatest stories of controversy, conspiracy, and corruption. Well, Amber, we are so excited and so honored to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I obviously want you to have the opportunity to give your own introduction to yourself and to your podcast, and even your books. I would love to hear more about that. But before I hand it over to you, I wanted to do a little intro myself to how I came across you and your podcast. So one of my all-time favorite podcasts, I'm sure I am joined by many others when I say this, is True Crime Obsessed. I think for most true crime podcast listeners out there, you're familiar with True Crime Obsessed because they're just amazing. And they're a major podcast in the true crime industry. And I've hooked many friends and family members on the podcast. I'm a member of their Patreon. I have a TCO mug and sweatshirt. I have all the things. So I am obsessed with True Crime Obsessed. And so when I saw through that association that, you know, your podcast, you're on the Obsessed Network, I knew that it was going to be good before I even started listening to it. And once I did actually start listening to it, I became obsessed very quickly. You know, here on Hashtag History, we're obviously a history podcast, but we also do love to dive into true crime now and then by covering some more historical true crime incidents. And that's why I think I really fell in love with your podcast, Amber. The Crimes of the Centuries podcast is similar to that. We've actually covered a lot of the same topics. We've covered the 1982 Tylenol poisoning. Actually, when you covered that, I was like, oh yeah, this is a sealed deal that I'm going to love this podcast because not many people cover that. So I was excited that you did. We've covered that. We've also both covered Patty Hearst, the Salem witch trials, the Satanic Panic, Roanoke, all the good things. So I know, you know, having said all of that, that any listeners of our podcast would also love yours, Amber. Now that I have done that whole long intro and talked too much, why don't you tell our Hashtag History listeners more about yourself and about your podcast, your books, all the awesome things that you're doing?
Well, thank you. I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for about a quarter century.
Wow.
Yeah, give me a minute. Yeah, and I was always drawn to crime reporting, not because I like the sensational side of it, but because I had endured loss when I was younger. And I think I was empathetically drawn toward people who were going through that. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like every time I would get a beat at a newspaper, I would just end up like shifting bit by bit over to crime. Mm-hmm. And then I came to the Cincinnati Enquirer. Somebody said that there was an interesting case and would I like to look into it? So that is how my first podcast, Accused, was born. It was something I thought at first was going to be a newspaper story, and then we expanded it. And then when the pandemic hit, we have a Patreon, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to give people anything, and they're supporting me, right? Mm-hmm. So I started recording this history thing in my closet because I didn't have a setup at home yet. And when I did it, I really liked doing it. I did Mary Fagan, the first case. Mm-hmm. And that had been like the first true crime case that I remember hearing about, and it just stuck with me.
Yeah.
So then I had been talking to Patrick Hines from True Crime Obsessed, and I mentioned I had, maybe this thing would actually work as its own podcast. And he said, yeah, maybe. Mm-hmm. And so that's how Crimes of the Centuries was born. And we're entering our second season. It has just begun.
Awesome. Is there anything more that you can share with us about season 2 of the podcast? Anything if you're allowed to share anything we can expect.
One of my favorite things that I'm sort of branching out in, I'm trying to keep in mind that crimes of the centuries, if you only go by the big headlines, you're only going to get a certain demographic of crime.
Sure.
So I'm trying to really delve into different communities and what were the turning point crimes in those communities.
I love
and
that.
I never really dug history, but learning it through a true crime lens for some reason just really works for me.
Yeah, that's something that we say a lot with our podcast. I was a history major. My co-host, Leah, was not, but she also still super loves history. But the reason we decided to do a history podcast is because we want to make history more interesting to those that, don't necessarily think that they like history, but I think everyone does. The stuff that we cover on our podcast are the greatest controversies and conspiracies, throughout history. And who doesn't love like juicy tales like that about the Salem witch trials or about Patty Hearst or, those sorts of things. We all love those stories, and those are in essence history.
Yeah, I love the stories, and I really love being able to draw the lines from what happened then to how things are now.
Yes.
That probably gives me a slight sense of control in a world I cannot control. It at least helps me contextualize and comprehend, how things can evolve. And that's just been fascinating. I mean, just that, I think you guys did Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. The understanding the labor movement at that time is key to understanding why that resonated when it did.
Yes. So. And kind of, like you said, drawing that line through history of where we are now because of that incident too.
Right.
And I really appreciate something you said about, it almost grounds you and gives you a sense of, I don't know what the word is, maybe sanity. When I look back at like the 1918 pandemic, how the parallels between that and what we're going through now almost does give me this sense of clarity. And I don't want to say peace, but history does repeat itself. And so I've been able to pull and draw on those parallels and say, okay, we've been here before. We've done this before. That's one of the really neat things about history.
Completely. As soon as the pandemic hit and we were sent home from work at my newsroom, that was immediately what I did. I went and looked up all the newspaper coverage of the 1918 flu. And it was incredibly eye-opening. And I think there really is something, you think about these people in the Salem era and, they look just like us.
I know.
And life went on. They went through terrible things and life went on. So I think it gives me a sense that it's going to keep trucking along.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. So one of the things, although our two podcasts have covered many of the same topics, I think I've admitted this to you over email before, Amber. There are so many topics that I want to cover on our podcast, but they're just so daunting. Like the level of research is daunting, getting it right is daunting. And so that's one of the many reasons that I'm excited to have you here today, because one of those topics that I think is such an important incident in history that you have covered so well on your podcast is that of the Osage Nation Murders. It was your season finale episode, I believe, right? For season one. So we're just going to have a little bit of a, back and forth conversation. I'm going to have you tell us about the Osage Nation Murders. It's, again, a topic that I have always wanted to bring to our podcast, but it's just so huge. So I'm really excited to have you, all the research and everything that you've already done to come on and kind of share about that with our audience. So if you could sum it up in just a few sentences as like a quick summary before we dive into it, what exactly were the Osage Nation Murders?
It was one of the biggest, deadliest conspiracies really in American history. It's known today as the Reign of Terror because it was so devastating and so sinister. It involved people marrying into families with the intent of killing those people off. Yes. It is just fascinating.
So tell us all about it. Where does this begin?
So the Osage Nation was one of many nations of Native Americans in America at the time, and it had done better financially than a lot of them. It just seems like there were some innate business skills in these people. And we all know that obviously Native Americans, they've lost a lot of their land because they'll settle somewhere and then a white person, a white group will say, hey, we want to farm there, get out. So to stop that from happening yet again to the Osage Nation, they bought this chunk of inhospitable land in
what is now Oklahoma.
They, in particular, zeroed in on this land. It was more than 1 million acres that was particularly rocky. And they're like, okay, so finally, nobody's going to boot us off to farm here. And then they struck oil,
right?
And all hell broke loose. So what's fascinating to me is that even before they found oil at the turn of the century, this nation was prosperous. They had just done really well for themselves, and they'd been super smart by buying this new land outright instead of accepting something via treaty, which could be turned on. So they bought this land, which gave them more leverage. The U.S. government ended up wanting to make that area a state. And because they owned all of that, that was going to be problematic. They ended up passing some kind of law that you could own as an individual a plot of land, but the Osage Nation couldn't own the entire chunk of land as a nation. So they divided up the land and individuals got it. But the nation said, yeah, but we want to keep the mineral rights beneath the land. They wanted to do it because they respected the land in a way that, you know, the incoming settlers did not.
Yes.
They had no idea what they were asking for at the time, but they said, okay, we own what's beneath the land. And then they struck oil. And that made things incredibly complicated because they just got filthy rich.
Yes.
They got incredibly rich. And it was divided equally among the members. They were called headrights. So when the money would come in from the oil, it would be dispersed. If somebody died, they could pass along their headright. It could be inherited, but it couldn't be sold. So wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden there was a lot of interest in marrying people from the Osage Nation after that.
And not only marrying, but if I remember your episode correctly, reproducing offspring.
Oh, yeah. No, these are entire lives. Yeah. So from the outside, if you were not aware of what was going on and you were not a cynical bastard like I am, you would just
welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You would see lovely people falling in love and starting families. And, you know, there was a lot of work available because of the oil. So there were a lot of white people who moved into the area and were great. Like they made fantastic money off of it. And some of them were really incredibly kind to the nation members. There was this one guy who came in, William K. Hale. He had moved in to, you know, try and make a buck, but he was known throughout town as being just a generous, soft-hearted guy. He would see a Native American kid upset one day and buy him a pony and buy the men suits that matched his because he wore a suit every day.
Oh, my God.
I'll never understand that.
Yeah.
And so it was a community. Now, white people are sometimes racist.
Oh, okay. Newsflash, everyone.
Yeah. In case you didn't know that. And, you know, there have obviously been eras in American history where that has been codified. And in this case, I mean, this isn't like a progressive reading of things. They were racist toward the Osage Nation. They did not consider them smart enough to be able to handle all this money that they were getting.
That was actually something I wanted to, you know, make sure we highlighted was not only was this a greedy, jealous thing, but it was also passed off or spun in this quote unquote for their own good kind of thing.
Right.
And we've talked about that on our podcast before too, specifically when we covered the American Indian boarding schools, that like, we're doing this for your own good. We want you to be civilized, successful people. And so that's why we're coming in. We're just trying to help. Obviously, you aren't as business savvy as we are. So that's why we are intervening.
Of course, they allowed this giant oil-filled chunk of land to be sold. And
so bright.
Right. And the nation was smart enough to buy their land. They had done very well. There was no reason to assume that they were dumb with money. But that's what the government assumed. So they said, okay, well, you own the headrights to this oil. You get the money from it, but you're not smart enough to know how to spend all that money. So we're going to assign a white dude to oversee you. It's called, they actually pronounced it Guardian, but it's spelled Guardian. I'm going to say Guardian. These guardians would then dole out money, and it would be like $1,000 at a time. And it didn't matter that, they had actually gotten $3,000 in headright funds that period. One guardian might have several Osage members underneath them. Mm-hmm. And then there started to be accidents.
Right.
So there would be...
And what time period are we talking about here?
So it's tough to know really when everything started, but turn of the century is when they strike oil. 1906 is when they enact the Osage Act, which gives them the headrights. It's around this time, too, with the headrights hoopla, that they also create the guardianship program.
Because I know something you mentioned in your episode, too, because you're just about to touch on, people start falling dead and we can't trace back when those first ones happened. Why is that? Just because of record keeping or? Yeah,
absolutely. So, somebody would die and it would be explained as a mysterious illness. Mm-hmm. A tragic accident, what have you. And nobody was looking into it. I mean, after all, not only are these marginalized people, but there are people who are outright considered stupid.
Right.
Which is just so offensive.
Right.
So it's like, dumb got himself killed, you know. It's in the early 1920s, though, that it starts to become noticeable that there are multiple dead Osage, more than makes sense.
Yeah,
given
more than natural causes.
Exactly. Yeah. Statistically, it's getting a little high there.
Yep.
The one that first caught people's attention was a woman named Anna Brown. She was one of 4 sisters. Her father had died before the oil was struck, I believe. 1895 is when he died. Mm-hmm. And then, so because he died, the headrights were passed along to his widow. Mm-hmm. And then she had these 4 daughters. Mm-hmm. And so when one of those headrights would be passed along, now you have 2, now you have 3, right? So you get a bigger chunk of money. These 4 sisters, they had a really close, loving family. They grew up, they got married. This woman, Anna, she was divorced at the time, but from all accounts, she was like this really vivacious party girl. Mm-hmm. She liked to wear the flapper styles, and she liked spending her money. Yeah. She would show up in furs and stuff. She showed up to a family party one night. She was drunk. She pissed off her sisters. And then the next day, she never came home. Oh. So she left this party with a guy named Brian Burkhart. Mm-hmm. Now, Brian was brothers with Ernest Burkhart. Ernest Burkhart was married to Anna's sister, Molly. So this is all very interconnected. And Ernest and Brian, these brothers, they were nephew to the guy I mentioned earlier, the rich suit-wearing fellow.
Got it.
William K. Hale. So she leaves with Brian and she never gets home, and her sisters panicked.
Sure.
And around the same time, another member of the tribe also goes missing. This one was a male. Search parties are going all around trying to figure out where these people are, coming up with nothing. And finally, some days later, they're strangely located right around the same time in separate parts of the area.
Interesting.
Anna Brown, initially people assumed she died of alcohol poisoning.
Okay.
She had been drunk that night.
Sure.
She had been drunk a lot.
Yeah.
So that was a fair initial thought, but it didn't explain the bullet hole in the back of her head.
Yeah, that is not a common symptom of alcohol poisoning.
This is true. So,
not medical experts here, but
right. Now, Anna Brown, one of her sisters had already had some strange wasting away disease. Okay. So I believe that one was Minnie. Mm-hmm. So she died really young. Then Anna dies. And then a couple months after Anna, their mom, Lizzie, dies of the same wasting away condition that struck the earlier one. And so bit by bit, this family's just dropping dead.
Interesting.
So they end up with 2 daughters left, Rita and Molly. And meanwhile, there are all these other characters. It's the difficult thing about this story is how to tell it, because it's hard to know where to start and when to stop. So you've got people here and there. Like in 1922, a guy named William Stepson dies of supposedly poisoning. Mm-hmm. And then a couple months later, 2 more die. And the bodies start piling up enough that a really high profile white oil man in the area who was an ally, actual ally, decided he wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to urge the federal government to do something about this. There were just so many bodies that he was like, why isn't anybody looking into this?
Yes.
So he gets on a train and he never arrives.
Oh, my
And he was
God.
viciously killed. He was stabbed some 20 times. And nobody was supposed to know really where he was except the people closest to him. This was a pivotal moment because he was a white man, but also because it hinted at something so sinister.
Right.
It probably drew federal attention better than had he gone and given a speech, which very well could have been dismissed as,
Absolutely.
crazy talk, conspiracy theory type stuff.
Yeah. And I also think, too, not only the fact that he's white, but also these other deaths, you can almost, if you squint your eyes and kind of turn your head sideways, you can almost veil them as something else, right? Alcohol poisoning, wasting away. But for him, viciously murdered on his way to attempt to remedy this situation or to draw light to this situation. That's just too suspicious.
Right. There was no explaining this. It was clear as day what had happened.
Right.
And it was terrifying. Rita is so scared that she actually buys a house near Molly. She just feels a little safer living closer by. Mm-hmm. And March 10th, 1923, Molly is awakened by this huge explosion. And she wakes up, runs to her window and sees Rita's new house just engulfed in flames. So it's this giant ball of orange. And Rita was killed immediately. So was her housekeeper. Her husband, this is one of the interesting parts of how interconnected these families were. Her husband had actually been Minnie's husband before she died of the wasting away disease. Ooh. So on the surface, you look at, so this guy's had 2 wives die.
Yeah, that's fishy.
And he did survive the blast of the second one, but he was so mortally wounded that we know it wasn't him.
Yeah.
Luckily, though, he wasn't killed instantly because he was the one who finally said, I think I know what's happening here. He had been screwed over by somebody, and it was the first time that anybody put a name to a possible suspect.
Wow.
A gentleman named George Bighart fell really ill, ended up in the hospital, and immediately called his lawyer. So this is a few months after the explosion. This is in June 1923. Bighart meets with his lawyer, a white man named W.W. Vaughn. Vaughn is super well respected. He's got 10 kids. He was a city attorney. Like, he was a high profile guy. Mm-hmm. And by all accounts, a good hearted person.
Sure.
Well, when he goes to chat with Bighart in the hospital, Bighart gives him some documents and tells him enough that Vaughn gets really excited. And he calls the county sheriff and says, we can do something about this. You can make an arrest. We've got enough here. We can end this thing. Bighart died of his poisoning the next morning. Vaughn was killed that night. His body was found. He had been just brutalized.
Oh, God.
He had been taken off of his train. He was kidnapped. He was stripped down. He was beaten. It was just cruel. And he was such an upstanding guy that he had told his wife before he left, hey, if something happens to me, I've put some documents in this special place and I want you to get them and turn them over if that happens. And I'm sure that, I can't imagine any wife going, okay, take care. I'm sure she tried to talk him out of it, especially since they had 10 children. But he went anyway because he was a good person. When Vaughn's body is found, the documents that Bighart gave him, they're missing.
Of course.
When his wife goes to the secret hiding place to pull those documents, those are missing. It's such a vast conspiracy. Yep. And people obviously are just scared as hell.
Yes.
So at this point, the FBI, I'm sure you've covered how the FBI has evolved and so forth. At this point, it was just kind of getting its footing as the Federal Bureau. It was the Bureau of Investigation still, but what's his name? J. Edgar Hoover. You know that dude.
What's that guy's name?
You know, J. Edgar Hoover had just like come in. He was this young hotshot. He was trying to make the Bureau into something important. It had no jurisdiction over homicide at the time.
That actually was something, you know, I studied the evolution of the FBI. We've covered it, you know, here and there on the podcast, but that was something when you mentioned it in your episode. I don't know why it was that just kind of like clicked in my head, like, oh my God, like that's just such a crazy fact that there was no jurisdiction over homicide for the FBI at a point in their history.
No, that's been one of the most fascinating things for me. Just every single case that I've covered that overlaps with the FBI, I've learned something new about the history. I didn't understand that, you know, kidnappings didn't fall under them until Lindbergh. And anyway, what did fall under the Bureau's purview, though, were Native American issues. And nobody else wanted to look into these deaths on the Osage Nation, largely for, you know, racist reasons, but they just didn't want to touch it. And so J. Edgar Hoover at first had a guy recruited, Blackie Mansfield, from prison. This was a guy with a record, and, you know, he was going to infiltrate, and instead he killed a cop and robbed a bank, and that didn't work out so well. And Hoover, trying to save face, was like, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. He assigned an FBI agent named Tom White, who had been a Texas Ranger. So this was somebody with, you know, cred. And that guy moved into the area. Everybody knew that he was there investigating. But he also brought with him some undercover people, including, as far as we know, the first Native American to work for the FBI. And so those people just moved into the area and became part of the community. The local people didn't know that those folk were answering to White. But basically, those people would gather these little tidbits of info, they'd give them to White, and then White would try and flesh out and figure out what to do. They zeroed in pretty quickly on William K. Hale. Their reasoning was Hale was a really gregarious, popular figure. He was just strong-willed. Like, he was powerful. His nephews were pansies. They were known as being weak-willed. They were known as, you know, doing whatever their uncle told them to do. And Ernest was married to Molly Brown. And Molly was the last Brown remaining after Rita's house was bombed. Can you imagine?
No.
And who would go like, this will be subtle?
Oh my God. And not only that, but the trauma that her sister experienced watching it. In the legal field, you can also sue for damages if, like, you're a mom and you watched your son right in front of you get hit by a car. You as a mom can also sue for damages because of the emotional distress that you endured witnessing that. And so I just can't even imagine as a sister watching your sister's murder.
Well, not just that, but she had also watched her younger sister, Minnie, her mother, Lizzie, die of this wasting away. I mean, I watched my mom die of cancer. It is ugly. And from what I've read, it probably looked fairly similar. And then her other sister, Anna, had been shot in the head. So, of course, Molly's getting terrified.
And I don't know if it's a 2020 hindsight, knowing, you know, what happened with this incident, where this is going, or if it's because, like you kind of already mentioned, just being cynical people. But it's interesting that this particular family was so targeted to be essentially, decimated. And my cynicism would say that that's because they had so many headrights, right? Like, this family had so many members that had rights to this money through the oil industry. So I find it, with air quotes, interesting that their whole family was so targeted to be decimated.
I have thought about this too. I think there's something to the fact that there were 4 daughters also, because each of those 4 daughters married off. And it's not just historically been a racist society, it's been a sexist society. And so the men marrying in basically were the ones controlling the money.
That's a great point. Would it have been different if it were 4 sons? Because a woman marrying in, she's not going to take control of that money. So yes, Molly's the last one.
of course, the FBI agents are thinking that Ernest has got to be at the heart of this, her husband. Now, they had 2 children. They had married in 1917. Anna died in 1921. 1923 was the explosion. I mean, this is a long relationship with children. So the FBI decides they're going to put some pressure on Ernest because they know that he is weak-willed. And sure enough, he cracks pretty quickly and lays out this conspiracy that is just jaw-droppingly evil.
It makes my stomach hurt.
It really, yeah, it's
he
very
has children, and he was conspiring against them.
Yeah, let me back this up for a second. Molly started to get sick, and it looked a lot like that wasting away thing that had hit her relatives. And so the FBI was feeling a huge sense of urgency. To their credit, I mean, it's at least heartening that when they came in ready to fight it, right. Like they took it seriously. So that's why they put the pressure on Ernest. Ernest cracks and explains that this has all been hatched by his uncle, William K. Hale. And all of these strange, mysterious deaths have some kind of tie to Hale. Not just because he's embedded in the community, but there was one victim who Hale had taken a life insurance policy out on. And what was funny about that is nobody knew that had happened until he sued because the insurance company wasn't paying him. That's how greedy these people were. Wow. And if you think about it, too, if they had stopped, when they were rich enough, they would have gotten away with it.
Yes.
But they kept on doing it and kept on doing it. And
the level of greed of that, you killed the person. So you're already, if I'm understanding this correctly, already getting headrights, already making money off of whoever you married into after you killed off that person, but then also taking out a life insurance policy on that person. And then when it didn't work out the way that you wanted to, suing to get even more money. Like I said, it actually makes my stomach sick, this level of evil. I think that what you said, it's just evil.
Yeah. Yeah. So Brian, the brother of Ernest, the one who had gone home with Anna,
yes.
he of course was tied to her death. He also confessed. The 2 of them were put on trial. First jury came back hung. There were multiple trials, and the long and short of it was that around 1929, Ernest flipped on his uncle. And the only murder that was tried was Henry Rowan.
Do you know why the jury was hung? Just a jury of all white racist men, or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
because they had confessions. They had a lot of stuff. I know that they were fighting, entering the confessions into evidence and yada yada. But the gist of it really is it was going to be hard to convict anyone unless you had essentially a smoking gun. The case that finally goes to trial was Henry Rowan. He was a full-blooded Osage. He had been discovered behind the steering wheel of his car, bullet hole in the head. Oh. And he was the one with the life insurance policy. So that trial ended with Hale's conviction. And in fact, Ernest, he assisted the government. So in theory, he was supposed to get a plea deal, get off a little easier. He ended up serving the most time of anyone convicted. Hale, of course, ends up getting pardoned within 20 years. He was supposed to be sentenced to life. That's not how it worked. There is no real accountability in this story, except, number one, talking about it today. I mean, that's important, not letting it be forgotten. But also, the government at least passed some laws that said that you had to be Osage to inherit these headrights. So if you came in and you had this years-long plan to get somebody to fall in love with you, to parent children, to do all the things just to kill this person, it still wouldn't be your money in the end.
That is what I was going to ask, because we know that as we see time and time again throughout history, there weren't necessarily repercussions for these crimes, but what would you say were the lasting legacies of this incident in history?
I think this one was important. It highlighted such corruption that I think it made it impossible for people to look away at how this nation, at least, was being treated and how they were being manipulated and discriminated against. There's a phenomenal book on this, Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yes.
Just, I mean, like a legitimately fascinating, well-written read. Mm-hmm. He lays it out really well. In one of these guardians had 12 Osage beneath him. He was the one overseeing their money, and half of them died, like within a couple of years.
Yep.
And so it was really, it's not a happy lesson, I don't think. It's a lesson in how depraved people can be, and how sometimes the conspiracy theories are true, or at least rooted in something real.
I think that's one of the biggest things about this incident is you cover on your podcast, we cover on our podcast all the time, ugly history, and things that are not pretty, but important to learn and acknowledge and to know. And that's what this incident is. But the layer on top of that is exactly what you just said. It's such a wild conspiracy that was true. It's something that if you saw this in a movie, you're like, wow, that's a great piece of fiction. It's right. One of those where it is so mind blowing, the lengths at which these greedy, racist people went to, including marrying into, reproducing children with, all for the sake of money.
Yeah.
It's really gross. It's this incident is so wild.
It is. I do kind of wonder what kind of cranky old lady I'm going to become. I might be one of those conspiracy theorist nuts who's sitting on the front porch saying,
and
the Osage Nation, it was true.
And half the time you might be right.
I might be.
We're not always off. I guess one of the more positive things to see from this incident was the FBI's, from what I've heard from your coverage of it, it does sound like they came in and they really took it seriously and wanted to get to the bottom of this. Yeah,
the FBI has such a complicated history, but
it really does.
At this point, I mean, this was a big win. Mm-hmm. It was still heartbreaking. It was a tragedy, but they did value these lives.
Yeah.
And they wanted to find the answer. I mean, these were at least good agents wanting to do the right thing. And this was an era, there was so much corruption in this situation that there were coroners who would fill bodies with quicklime so that they could help cover up causes of death.
That's disgusting.
So no question, Tom White could have gone to the dark side,
sure.
No question that any one of these people could have gone for the money instead, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And it did solidify the FBI as a powerful agency.
Yeah.
I mean, it had smart people working in it, and Hoover, he ends up super controversial.
Right.
But not at the time. At the time, this was just heralded as genius and right. Mm-hmm. This was a righteous thing that they helped do.
Do you know from reading headlines around that time what the general public outside of the nations, what their reactions were to this? Were people at the time? I don't know if you can see this from headlines. I know it's hard as a history lover, reading headlines from 100 years ago. There's a lot of gaps, right? It doesn't always tell the full story.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if people 100 years ago were like, oh my God, I can't believe this crazy thing was happening. Or was it like, I don't know if I believe that.
It was really kind of a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
But what's fascinating is seeing before the stories were about the murders, they were about these rich Native Americans, and the coverage was incredibly racist. The red millionaires. They would write these stories about, basically just making them out to be like bumbling.
Yeah, fools that just happened to come upon money that they didn't deserve.
Right, exactly. And then it shifts. You start to see little headlines, somebody missing, somebody dies in a ravine. So they're covered, but nobody really knows the gravity of it, which is understandable. I mean, that would be the case with any community.
Sure.
But then once Anna Brown is murdered, it does start to shift to, geez, maybe there's something going on here. And there are more headlines at that point about, investigating the deaths. It's a snowball that keeps growing. After it happened, even though there was a conviction in it, the conviction was for one murder. So I think that gave people the ability to sort of minimize what had happened.
Yep.
You know, William K. Hale was convicted of killing Henry Rowan. Big whoop, you know. But the fact is that he was probably responsible. We're comfortable saying he was responsible for 24 deaths, possibly scores. We can't even know. There are people who just disappeared. And some of them, maybe they were natural deaths, but you can't tease it out.
Yeah.
I think because it was such an evil, unbelievable thing, some people chose not to believe it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. It's one of those things that's almost hard to believe.
Yeah.
Even now, 100 years later, it's hard to believe that greed would make someone infiltrate a community in such an intimate way.
Right. And he wasn't even just somebody around. He was somebody beloved. He bought people suits. He helped buy houses.
He's the uncle or the grandpa or whatever to all these children too.
Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing.
Yeah, I think amazing is the word, and not in the positive.
No, not in the
way.
Good sense.
Not in
amazing,
the good. Amazing.
Yeah. Amazingly nauseating.
Oh my God. Well, this is always that weird part where it's like, thank you so much for that story.
I know.
It's like, I feel disgusting now. So
I know. I never know how to end these.
Yeah.
On our Patreon, sometimes my co-reporter on Accused and we tell stories about cases we've covered that impacted us. And at the end of it, I'm always like,
yeah.
What do you say? And thanks for, especially because those are real people to me, because I did actually cover those cases. But yeah. And then we sign off with don't murder people.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that sign off. We should definitely end with that. Please don't murder people. Yeah,
because I got a little tired of hearing all the don't get murdered.
Yeah.
That's not victim blame.
Yeah.
Don't murder people.
That. Just don't do it. Well, how can our listeners find you, Amber? Do you have a website, social media handles, if people are interested in listening to your podcast, reading your books?
Yeah, please do. Crimes of the Centuries just started season 2. Accused is about to drop season 4.
Wow.
Please support us. I mentioned the Patreon. That goes directly to us as opposed to the million other, entities with hands in the thing. I do have some books. I didn't even talk about those.
No, go for it. I mean, we're at the end here, but I would love to hear a little bit about them because I know one of them is a Kennedy related thing.
Yeah. Most of them are true crime books. The Kennedy, it's called The Kennedy Wives. It was a bestseller 1 week, but I get to say it.
Oh, absolutely. You absolutely
It gets to be in my obituary.
That is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. And but The Kennedy Wives was I think that was probably what started me down the history path. It's just fascinating to really put all the pieces together. But on Twitter, I'm Reporter Amber. My website's reporteramber.com. Trying to make that a little consistent.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for being here. It really was such an honor to have you and to have you talking about this topic that I've been wanting to talk about, but I wanted to do it right. And you totally did it right on your podcast. So I'm so honored that you came here to share it with us.
Well, thank you. I hate telling these stories,
sure,
but I love making sure they're remembered.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Well, thank you so much, everyone. As Amber closes out on her Patreon, don't be a murderer.
Don't murder people.
Don't murder people. I had to put a little spin on it. It's copyrighted by you. So
exactly. Perfect.
Don't be a murderer. And thank you so much again, Amber.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening to the season 9 finale of #History. Be sure to keep an eye out on Instagram for announcements about our return for season 10. You can find more information about #History podcast on our website at #history-pod.com. But like we've shared many times before, Instagram is the place to go check out our latest announcements. So follow us there at #history_podcast. We're also on TikTok at #history and on Twitter at #history_. As always, we would love it so much if you would subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you use, share about us with your family and friends, and then give us a rate and review. And finally, if you still can't get enough of us, come join us over on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you can help support our books and booze supply. You also get access to some behind-the-scenes content, weekly #hangout episodes, and we mail you cards and stickers. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next season. Bye.